pleased to introduce our speaker, Dr. Beth Cabrera, who has been a college professor, moved into leadership development, and her current focus is on well-being. She's an author, researcher, and motivational speaker. Her book is titled Beyond Happy. And a special thanks to Erin Dasher, who thought of giving a copy of Beth's book to all members. She purchased them for distribution. And thank you to Betsy Kazazian, Ann Taylor, and Ann Guerin, who helped me deliver them. It's kind of a fun thing. I got to see some people I had not seen in a while. Beth is a graduate of Georgia Institute of Technology and has returned to her alma mater as the First Lady of Georgia Tech, as she is the wife of Dr. Angel Cabrera. As such, she is our chapter's newest honorary member. And her talk this morning is titled Bouncing Back Better. And she will give us some tips on positive things we can do as we emerge from the pandemic. She will be happy to take questions at the end. So please send your questions via the chat function, and I will call on you individually at the end to ask your questions directly to Beth. So be ready to unmute yourself when I call on you. So with that, Beth, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction, Mary. And I want to thank Leslie and Erin for asking me to speak to you all today. Thank Erin because I'm really grateful for that she bought the books for everybody. I appreciate that. I'm also grateful to be talking today about bouncing back better. So I've spent a year giving dozens and dozens of talks on resilience. And to people who were losing their jobs, losing family members, having very, very difficult times over this past year. So giving them some strategies for how to try to stay resilient during this global pandemic that we've all lived through now. So it's really exciting to me to be speaking today about the idea of thinking about coming back from this, and we're getting vaccinated, and things are opening up, and I really would like us all to think a little bit about how we can bounce back better from this really difficult year that we have all experienced. So it's a little bit what let me see if I can get my screen to change. Yeah, what Sir Winston Churchill said, to never let a good crisis go to waste. So I think, it might be our tendency to just want to go back to normal, go back to the way things were. We just can't wait for things to return. But I think we have a real opportunity here to be more intentional about how we go back, and to use the things that we've learned over this past year to really bounce back better, to go back in a better way. And we know from research actually that people who experience difficult life situations very often grow from them and actually have a lot of benefits that they've gained from that adversity. So it's called post-traumatic growth. And this is the positive psychological change experienced as a result of struggle with a highly challenging life circumstance or situation. So I would argue we have all experienced a very highly challenging life situation over the past year. And the good news is that we can actually grow from that. And there are some things that we can learn from this experience that we can use to bounce back better. In the research, when they talk to people who've experienced, terrible health issues or losses or have had challenging times, these are some of the things that they find that these people very often say they have benefited in this way. And the first one is greater resilience. So resilience is really about using coping skills to get through difficult times. And it turns out that the best way to learn coping skills is to actually have to use them in difficult times. So the research actually shows that people who have experienced at least a moderate amount of adversity in their lives tend to be more resilient than people who haven't. So we will all be more resilient going forward because we've learned how to get through this difficult time. Something else people almost always say is that their relationships are stronger after they've gone through something hard, that we realize how important our relationships are to get through hard times. and we realize, who's been there and who's helped us, and we come out with stronger relationships after a difficult experience. Another thing people often say is this renewed appreciation for life. When you've had a challenging time, you come through it so grateful that you made it through, and so appreciative of what you have. And I would say after this pandemic, not just life in general, but there were so many small things that we took for granted in our lives. Being able to eat at a restaurant, being able to go to work every day, send our kids off to school every day, go grocery shopping and without fear. So just all of those small things, hopefully we're going to go back and not take those things for granted. We're going to appreciate all of these small things that we weren't able to do over the past year. And then a final one is this idea of new possibilities in life. So getting through something challenging, difficult, really makes you say, life is short and I have one precious life. What am I going to do with it? And how can I do things better? So I want to focus on just a couple of these, I think, real learnings that we can take from this past year. The first is this idea of greater resilience. So we have, I think, all learned how to be resilient. We've had to develop coping skills to get through this past year. A lot of those skills, the things that we use to be resilient in hard times, are actually things that we can use to thrive in good times. So I want to just highlight a few of the kind of positive strategies that I think a lot of people have used to get through the pandemic, and that we know from positive psychology research can again help us in good times as well. So going back to the idea of relationships, that's something that most of us have appreciated. I mean, one of the hardest parts of this pandemic for everyone has been not being able to be with our loved ones, or to go out with our friends, or to connect with other people. So I think we do have a greater appreciation for how important those relationships are. We also found ways to connect, even though we couldn't physically be together. So we had the Zoom calls and the FaceTimes, and we learned ways to connect. I certainly reconnected with college friends. We had Zoom happy hours, people I hadn't talked to in years, and it really was helpful to talk to these people and connect with friends. So again, this is something that helps you to be resilient and get through difficult times. We also know, though, that relationships are the number one factor for happiness. So going forward, let's remember how important relationships are, and remember to nurture our relationships. The research, study after study after study, shows that people who are thriving, the main difference between them and other people is the strength of their relationships. So we're going to all be excited to get together and see family and friends, but then we're going to also get busy. And a lot of times we're kind of too busy to then get together with family and friends. And that's something we need to remember to prioritize in order to thrive. Remember how important relationships are, and make efforts to connect with others and to spend time with others. Gratitude is something else that I think we've all learned about over this past year. And gratitude is really just noticing what's good and focusing on that, and being thankful for that. And there were so many examples during this past year. Despite having a terrible year, there was so much that we could be grateful for. And we had people celebrating at night, applauding the healthcare workers from the balconies. I was so grateful for my Amazon delivery person, and for the people in the grocery stores who continued to put their health at risk so that I could have what I needed. I don't know if any of you saw the Some Good News web series that John Krasinski did, but it was amazing. And he had these webinars that he, during April and May, some of the hardest months, where he highlighted the good things that were happening. And he had a prom where he had Billie Eilish and the Jonas Brothers playing music with Zooms of kids who didn't get to go to prom. And he had a graduation with all of these kids who didn't get their graduations, with Oprah speaking, and Steven Spielberg and Malala, people doing wonderful things. And I think we all learned to be grateful for those small things that brought us joy We were stuck at home, but there were still things we could be grateful for. And that again is something that going forward, it's important for our well-being, even when things are going well. We'll have bad days. Our tendency is to actually focus on the negative. We have a negativity bias. So learning how important it is to find the small things. There's always something good. There's always something you can be grateful for, and remembering to try to focus on that even as we come out of this terrible year. Now, acceptance is a hard one. Acceptance, people say, I don't want to accept certain things, right? Acceptance is the idea of accepting things you cannot change. And this is very important for resilience and for our well-being. The sooner you're able to accept something that you cannot change, you cannot control, the sooner then you are able to focus on, so what can I do? What can I control? And in my resilience talks, the whole idea of resilience is saying, I can't control that there's a virus out there. I can't control that people are getting sick and dying. I can't control that I have to work from home. I can't control that I have to, teach my kids at home. I have to homeschool. So many things that we couldn't control. But the sooner we were able to accept those things and say, okay, but what can I do? How can I find joy in these days staying home? What can I do as far as even my attitude towards things? What can I do to stay safe? What can I do to manage working from home and homeschooling? So I think we've all learned the lesson of acceptance this past year. We had no choice but to accept the situation. And then within that say, but what can I do? So this again is a lesson for resilience and a lesson moving forward. The sooner you accept things you can't control, the more able you are to focus on what can you do? How do you respond to the situation, which is what you can control, rather than a situation that you can't. And a final one I'll say is really important is the importance of nature for our well-being. And study after study shows this. So we have what we call biophilia. I mean, our ancestors lived in nature. Nature is calming. Nature improves our well-being. And certainly, I personally found an escape in nature. It's the only way I could get out of my house was to walk my poor dog, who got tired of going on walks because I wanted to go on a walk every 2 hours, or to be in my backyard. I started gardening. I planted flowers. I mean, just getting outside was one of the biggest parts of the joy that I found in my day. And this is something that we know in bad times it's helpful. And I think we learned that during the pandemic, but it's important always. So the more you can get outside and connect with nature, the better your well-being is going to be. So if you're going back to work and you're going to be in an office building, take a lunch break and get out in nature, go for a walk around the block, just have coffee on your porch, do anything you can to connect with nature. It's, again, good for resilience in bad times, but also very good for your well-being and thriving in good times. So those are some hopefully positive learnings that we've had, and things that, are important for resilience, but also important going forward to bounce back better and to thrive in good times. And now I want to touch on this idea of new possibilities in life. So again, thinking, I don't want to just go back to the way it was. I want to bounce back better. I want to take these learnings and make some positive change in my life. And there's a great, I saw this in an interview with Idris Elba recently, and he said he had COVID. He said, during my time with COVID, I was asymptomatic. I guess I feel incredibly lucky, and it's given me a slightly different perspective on life, a little bit of a new lease on life. And then he goes on to say, I'm going to do things differently. And this really has been a push to do things that I was putting off, or do things that are more meaningful. And so I think for all of us, this is an opportunity to say, how can we bounce back better? This is kind of an inflection point, right? And rather than just going back to the normal way of doing things, what can we learn from this? Or what can we intentionally say, I'd like to do differently? Positive change. Now, the hard part of any positive change is that so much of what we do is just our automatic behaviors, is just by habit. And they say up to 40% of our daily behavior are habits that we don't think about, that are completely unconscious. That makes it hard to change. It's hard to change something that we just do automatically and aren't even aware of. But the good news here is having this disruption that we've had in our lives gives us an opportunity to change, because most of those habits, that those routines that we have, very context dependent. So the pandemic actually interrupted a lot of our routines and changed a lot of our behaviors, because we all of a sudden, weren't going to the office, weren't taking our kids to school, weren't going about our normal business. So we have an opportunity here. Wendy Wood wrote this book, Good Habits and Bad Habits. And so she said, she said, out of periods of turmoil, seeds for a better way of doing things can be sown. There's an opportunity there if we choose to act on it. And that's exactly what she's saying. She's like, when we went home, all of a sudden we lost our cues and our routines, and we started doing things differently. So we lost some of the habits that we had beforehand. We've also, over this past year, established new habits, right? We came up with new routines. We started doing new things, doing things differently. So a second thing I encourage you to do in order to bounce back better is to be really intentional about looking at your habits and looking at, sorry, I've moved my screen and now I can't change my screen. There we go. Kind of doing an inventory of your pre-pandemic and pandemic habits. So this is it, really taking some time to sit down and think, okay, before we went home, what were some of the good habits I had? Maybe I went to the gym 3 days a week or something that, I all of a sudden had to stop doing. That would be a good thing to get back to eventually. Or some bad habits. I'll point out something that I wrote about on my blog as a bad habit. A lot of people on their way to work stop by Starbucks. Have you seen the lines at Starbucks in the mornings? And that, for some people, that's not a great habit, not necessarily good for your wallet or for your waistline, especially if you're getting all the syrups and sometimes tempted by that sugary muffin there. But it was part of your routine. It's just when I go to work, I drive by the Starbucks, I stop, I get my latte, and I keep going. So think about some of those things that maybe weren't great for your health or your happiness, and some of the things that were, and write those down. Be really intentional about writing those down. And then look at this past year. So what are some of the good habits that you've maybe established while you were home? Maybe you're sleeping a lot more because you don't have to get up early and do the commute and get to work. Some of us have better habits eating wise because we're now making home cooked meals. We're not traveling and eating out. So maybe we're eating a lot healthier. Other people we know have put on the pandemic 15 or whatever because, with the stress, we were eating more and making all that yummy sourdough bread and whatever else. But so again, it's very personal, but think about yourself and some of the things you might have started doing this past year that you'd like to keep doing. And some of those things maybe that you don't, you're glad you're going to get out of this and stop doing. So once you've kind of thought about this, then you need to think about, okay, focusing on what are those bad habits that I do not want to go back to doing? And how can I preserve and maintain some of those good habits? And this is all about making a plan. You really need to be intentional. And the best plans are really focused on kind of the time and location. So think, when am I going to do these new things that now don't fit when I start having to get up and go to work again? So coming up now with a post-pandemic plan and looking specifically at those bad habits that you would like to avoid. So maybe, you're going to drive to work a different way so you don't even pass the Starbucks and you're not tempted, right? Or you can say, you know what, I'm going to make a pot of coffee and have a healthy breakfast in the morning. So I don't need my caffeine fix. I'll take my coffee with me and I won't be tempted to eat something that I shouldn't be eating at the Starbucks. Just what is my plan to not do that as I go back? And the same thing with the good habits, like the sleeping. Maybe, okay, you're going to say, okay, I guess I won't sleep anymore because I got to get up early. Well, maybe you can be really intentional about going to bed earlier. So, I really felt good getting more sleep. I was more energized. I was in a better mood. I don't want to lose that. And so I'm going to set an alarm to remind me to go to bed early enough to get enough sleep. So whatever those good habits are, maybe you were exercising, maybe you were walking or doing yoga. And now you're like, I was doing that in my leisurely mornings when I didn't have my commute. How am I going to do that? Have a plan. Maybe you take a yoga mat to the office and you commit to doing yoga on your lunch break, or you take tennis shoes and walking shoes and say, I'm going to get some walking in. Think about, if it doesn't work now in your new schedule going back, where will it work and how can you maintain that? And just ending with a few tips as far as we know about habit formation and how to have habits and keep habits. So we know that these habitual behaviors have to have a prompt. There is something that reminds you to do the behavior. And that's why all of these things were just routine, because there was something that just cued you to do it. You also need the motivation and the ability to do it. So when we think about kind of establishing these new habits or finding a way to maintain these habits when we go back, you need a cue. You're going to have a reminder. So maybe you've been listening to podcasts on your walks in the morning and you've really enjoyed that and you feel like you're learning a lot and it's something you want to keep doing. But your cue before was, I put on my walking shoes and I put in my, earbuds and I listen to my podcast. So let's say you want to do that now on your commute. So you could shift those podcasts to your drive to work. You might need a reminder at the beginning. You might need to put a Post-it note in your car to say, when you get in your car, plug in the podcast and then drive to work. So that's kind of like a habit stacking. So habit stacking is doing something, adding a habit onto something that you already have a habit of doing. That's one of the best ways to start a new habit. So a lot of us, when we have to start taking some medication, do it when you brush your teeth. Right? I mean, you're going to brush your teeth. You do that all the time. Put the medication there beside your toothbrush. And that's a way to stack a new habit onto an old habit. So you can start stacking your podcast listening habit that you want to maintain onto your commute habit. So stacking habits is a good way. Having reminders, having a Post-it note or putting things on the calendar and having the calendar send you a little beep to remind you to do something, anything you can do that's going to remind you to do this new behavior in a new environment. So you're no longer doing it based on your stay-at-home routine. You've got to figure out where it's going to fit and then how to remember to do that in your post-pandemic routines. So the cue is the prompt. Ease, if you make something easy, that reduces the need for motivation and ability. So the easier a habit is, the easier a behavior is, the more likely you are to do it. So you want to, whatever you can do to make it easy is more likely you'll do it, right? So maybe it's the healthy eating and you all of a sudden you're going to be stressed and you're going to be getting up early and going off to work. Can you prepare some of the meals ahead of time to make it easy? So you don't need the motivation or the time or just make your, a healthy breakfast, put some overnight oats in the fridge so you have a healthy oatmeal breakfast that you don't have to spend time preparing, or make a healthy lunch so you don't have to go. A bad habit would be, you don't want to go back to eating lunch out every single day. So I want a healthy lunch, so I'm going to prepare it ahead of time so it's easy. It's easy in the morning to grab my healthy lunch. Doing tiny behaviors is another way to make it easy. So BJ Fogg has a whole book called Tiny Habits. And what you want, especially going back, if you want to kind of make new habits with your new routine, it has to be easy to do or you're not going to do it. So maybe you were meditating for 20 minutes a day, or you were walking for an hour a day, and that's just not going to work with going back to work. So maybe you want to meditate for 2 minutes a day in the office now, or yoga. Let's go back to the yoga, right? So you were doing yoga for 30 minutes leisurely in the mornings when you didn't have to get up and get dressed, but you really want to maintain a yoga practice. Well, let's decide to take a yoga mat to the office and have a little reminder that, before I have lunch, I'm going to do yoga. And maybe you can only do 2 minutes or 5 minutes, not 30 minutes, but it's a way of transferring that habit to a new situation and getting in the habit of every day on your lunch break, doing a few minutes of yoga. And there will be days that you can actually do more, but it's important at the beginning to make it super easy so that you establish that habit and it becomes routine. Or it might be going for a walk and maybe you only have time for a 10-minute walk. That's okay. If every day at lunch you do a short walk, there will be days you can do a longer one, but what you want is to establish that behavior so it becomes really habitual. So these are just some ideas that can help you with your planning going forward, to decide, these are the things I want to maintain, and these are the ways I'm going to try to maintain it. So those are kind of the two things I wanted to share with you today about how we can bounce back better, be really intentional about trying to go back and make positive changes. So we've learned positive strategies that helped us to be resilient in a difficult year. Those same strategies can really help you to thrive in good times. And so remembering the importance of relationships and acceptance and gratitude in nature. And then being intentional about these habits and saying, there's certain things I really don't want to go back to doing. And it'll be, I'll be tempted to do that when I go back to my routines. And then certain things you really want to be intentional about maintaining that you've started doing. So thinking about these different ways you can have positive strategies and positive change going forward as we get out of this and head back into the real world. So that's what I have for you.
Beth, that was fabulous. And you have gotten numerous accolades and everything in the chat function. And I wanted to start with one question. You've given us positive strategies that we can do as individuals. Do you have any thoughts on positive strategies that an organization such as ARCS can do to bounce back better from the pandemic?
Yeah, I can give some positive strategies that I talk about in the workplace, and one of them is actually this focus on the positive. So in organizations, you have challenges to deal with, and so and that's important. But setting the stage, setting a positive tone, even as you start a meeting, can be really powerful. So starting with positive stories, and Leslie did this today, gave some great positive stories that were going on. The more positive you can kind of set the tone, we call it positive priming, starting with things that are positive. Actually, people are more creative. They're better at problem solving when they're in a positive frame of mind. So that can be really powerful. And gratitude, there are gratitude practices that you can share as a group, and you can ask people to, share things that they're grateful for or things that are going well at ARCS. So maintaining that positive focus is really important in general for organizations as well.
And Leslie does that very well. She's always very positive. So she's already figured that part out. And then Erin had kind of a follow-up for an organization. Erin, can you unmute and ask your question?
Yes, and thank you so much, Beth, for spending the time to talk to us today. It was such an inspiring talk. I'm wondering, and we had this question for another board that I'm on, actually at Georgia Tech, and I think for ARCS as well, just wondering how to incorporate Zoom into our culture without losing that personal connection.
I think we have to have some combination. I think, and there's fascinating research that Stanford did some research on Zoom fatigue, and there's fascinating research that shows even why it's exhausting. And seeing yourself on camera is terrible, and it's depleting. Not having eye contact. So with the Zoom and the camera, we don't have eye contact, and that's a real innate kind of human thing, and it makes us wary when there's not eye contact. It actually makes us kind of nervous as humans, like there's something wrong, and we're trying to. So all sorts of very subtle psychological issues when we have Zoom. So I think a combination of everything when we go back to work. I think 60% of the workers don't want to go back to the workplace and don't, want to work from home. So companies are going to have to figure that out. I don't think any company is successfully going to be able to go back to normal. We've learned that people can work from home, that Zoom does work. I mean, it's a great way to connect when you can't connect physically, but it can't be everything. So I think we need to go back. But even during this pandemic, before we go back, I think it's really important for people to think about, does every meeting have to be Zoom? And it does not. Phone calls can actually work. And the research that I was citing this was a separate study, showed that people solve problems as a team better when they are not on Zoom because of all of these distractions. And they found out that we have a visual, channel and an auditory channel, and that when it's just auditory, people are better problem solvers. So if it's actually a serious problem that you need to solve, turning off the cameras and doing a conference call has been shown in research to be better. So I think you need to decide, does everybody need to be on the meeting? Does it need to be a Zoom meeting? Can we do it? If it's a problem solving, maybe we don't, we want to call in. And then face-to-face is important. So I think we're going to see real hybrid situations going back. People don't want to be in the office every day. You're going to have Zoom meetings, but you have to be careful because you lose some things. And so phone calls, good old fashioned phone calls can work as well. So I just think thinking about every particular situation and making sure there are hybrid options.
Thank you.
Well, Beth, I cannot thank you enough. You've gotten a great deal of positive feedback and everything. And we are so happy to have you as a member of ARCS. And you are a great addition to our group. And I just encourage everybody to also follow Beth's blog, because you can continue to get uplifting comments and everything else by following her blog. So I encourage you to do that as well. So thank you for joining us, and I will turn things back over to Leslie.